Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that before a zipper was called a zipper, it was called a hookless fastener, a separable fastener, a clasp locker, and a slide fastener? Learn how Swedish-American scientist and inventor Gideon Sundback received patents for a hookless fastener, or what is known today as the zipper. Discover that earlier in 1846, Elias Howe, who patented the sewing machine, also invented an automatic continuous clothing closure, or a zipper.
Imagine holding a piece of technology so brilliantly engineered and, so completely integrated into your daily routine that you use it every single day without even looking at it.
Right, it's just muscle memory at this point.
Exactly. I mean, it secures your bags, it keeps you warm, it holds your boots together. But here's the crazy part. Creating this little everyday miracle was so incredibly difficult that it took, over 70 years, a catastrophic World's Fair flop, and the mud-soaked trenches of World War I to finally get it right.
Yeah, and it turns out the decades-long struggle to engineer that perfect mechanical connection, well, it actually holds a surprising blueprint for how we build human connections, too.
Which is wild, and that's exactly the journey we're going on today in this deep dive. We're looking at a great stack of material, primarily this fascinating history called Interlocking Lives, the history and heart of the zipper.
It really is a great read.
It is. So our mission today is to unpack the story behind the zipper. It's a dive that starts out in the realm of cold, hard mechanics, but ends up giving us this genuinely profound framework for our personal relationships.
Yeah, but to understand how we get to that philosophy, we kind of have to start with the engineering nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. And that nightmare kicks off in 1846 with a guy named Elias Howe.
Right, a name most people probably associate strictly with the invention of the sewing machine.
Which, to be fair, was a huge deal.
Oh, massive. The sewing machine was his golden ticket. I mean, it fundamentally changed the world's textile industry overnight. But in that exact same year, 1846, Elias Howe also invented the very first conceptual version of what we would eventually call the zipper.
But he definitely didn't call it a zipper.
No, he did not. He patented it under the name, and I quote, automatic continuous clothing closure.
Okay, let's just pause and appreciate how incredibly terrible that marketing is.
It was pretty bad.
Automatic continuous clothing closure. I mean, it sounds like a modern tech flop where an engineer names a consumer product something aggressively literal, dooming it from the very start.
Yeah.
It's like if someone invented the smartphone and called it the handheld rectangular continuous audiovisual communication interface. No one is going to buy that.
No, from a branding perspective, it is hilariously dry. But if we break down why a 19th century engineer would use those specific words, it actually reveals a lot about the problem he was trying to solve.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about how people secured their clothing before this. You had buttons, you had hooks, you had laces,
Right.
and these are all discrete individual points of connection. A button here, a gap, a button there, a gap. Howe was trying to describe a totally new paradigm, a closure that was continuous.
So no gaps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A solid seal from top to bottom.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense when you put it in the context of the 1840s. Solid seal against the cold or the elements would be revolutionary.
Yeah.
But he basically abandons it, right?
He does, yeah.
He puts all his chips on the sewing machine instead.
Well, he kind of had to make a choice about resource allocation. Howe had two brilliant ideas. But one, the sewing machine had undeniable immediate market viability. Every tailor, every factory owner could instantly see how a sewing machine would save them thousands of hours of labor.
Sure, instant money.
Right. The continuous closure, on the other hand, was an idea way ahead of the manufacturing capabilities of the time. It required microscopic precision to produce at scale. Plus, the public wasn't actively demanding a replacement for buttons yet. They were used to them.
Right, they didn't know they needed it.
Exactly. So while he tweaked his closure design over the years, he mostly just shelved it as a commercial product.
Which leaves us with this massive 40-year gap where absolutely nothing happens with this technology. We just kept buttoning our buttons and painstakingly lacing up our high Victorian boots.
Which was not a quick process.
No. Getting dressed back then was a major time commitment, which I think perfectly sets the stage for the next guy to pick up the baton, Whitcomb Judson.
Yes. Judson comes onto the scene in the late 19th century. He establishes the Universal Fastener Company and takes Howe's core concept, really trying to make it practical.
And he creates what he calls a clasp locker.
Right. And he doesn't target jackets or pants, he targets shoes.
Because lacing up a pair of stiff, knee-high leather boots in the winter is just miserable. If you could just pull a single tab and be done with it, that's like the ultimate 1890s life hack.
Totally.
So Judson takes his class blocker to the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And we really need to set the scene here because the 1893 World's Fair was a mind-blowing showcase of the future.
Oh, it was incredible.
You have the debut of the gigantic Ferris wheel. You have these massive pavilions lit up by early fluorescent light bulbs. People are trying juicy fruit gum for the first time.
Continuous sensory overload.
And sitting in the middle of all this technological wonder is Judson's shoe fastener.
A fastener that, unfortunately, was a complete disaster.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it saw very little popular success because the design was incredibly clunky. The class blocker had a nasty habit of jamming halfway up the shoe.
Oh, the worst.
And even worse, it would occasionally just burst open under pressure.
See, if your shoe fastener pops open while you're sprinting to catch a train, that's not a convenience. That is an active hazard.
Exactly the problem. Consumers took one look at it, maybe tried it once, and decided that traditional laces, while annoying, were at least reliable. So Judson's big debut was a flop.
So by the turn of the century, we have Howe's aggressively literal 1846 patent that never went anywhere, and Judson's 1893 class blocker that randomly pops open. The whole concept seems cursed at this point.
It really does. But the Universal Fastener Company doesn't fold. The story actually shifts from the glitz of the Chicago World's Fair to a workshop in Hoboken, New Jersey.
Okay, Hoboken.
Yeah, Hoboken is where the engineering finally catches up to the imagination. The Universal Fastener Company had hired a Swedish-American scientist and inventor named Gideon Sundback.
And he takes on the monumental challenge of fixing Judson's deeply flawed design.
Right. Sundback realizes that the problem isn't the concept itself, it's the lack of precision. So in 1913, he patents a hookless fastener, which is a vast improvement.
But he doesn't stop there.
No, he keeps iterating. He obsessively refines the angles and the math until 1917, when he receives a patent for the separable fastener.
And this 1917 version is the modern zipper, right? Like, this is the blueprint we still use today.
Yes, it is a marvel of precision engineering. Sundback cracked the code by moving away from those large, clunky clasps and instead focusing on micro-connections. He designed his new model to have exactly 10 fastening elements or teeth per inch.
Wow, 10 per inch.
Yep, and he created 2 facing rows of these interlocking teeth managed by a slider.
Okay, let's break down how that actually works, because I think most people, myself included, assume it's just 2 sets of teeth mashing together. I always pictured it like a perfectly choreographed merge in heavy highway traffic. 2 lanes of cars coming together, and if the speed is perfect, they just interlock.
I mean, the highway analogy captures the need for rhythm, sure, but it misses the actual physics of the mechanism. Cars don't physically bind to one another.
Fair point. That would be a terrible commute.
Right.
Okay, so a better way to look at it might be clasping your own hands together. Like, if you hold your hands out and keep your fingers perfectly straight and aligned with each other, and you push your hands together, your fingertips just bump. They crash.
Exactly.
But if you offset your fingers slightly, they slide past each other, fold over, and lock incredibly tight.
That is the perfect analogy. The entire system relies on an offset. If you look at a zipper closely, the teeth on the left track are never perfectly aligned with the teeth on the right track.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They are staggered by exactly half a tooth's height.
Which explains the 10 teeth per inch rule. Sundback figured out the exact mathematical density needed so that when those offset teeth are pushed together, they create a flexible but unbreakable continuous seal.
You got it.
But what about the slider itself, the little thing we pull up and down? Does it have moving gears inside or something?
None at all.
Really?
It is purely an exercise in geometry. Inside the slider is a tiny Y-shaped channel. It acts like a microscopic plow.
Okay.
When you pull the slider up, the wider part of the Y gathers the 2 separated rows of teeth, and the narrowing channel physically forces them together at the precise angle needed to make them interlock.
That's brilliant.
And then when you pull the slider down, the wedge inside physically splits the interlocked teeth apart.
It's so elegant.
Yeah.
Just a piece of shaped metal forcing an offset connection. And apparently the design was so intuitive that one of the videos we reviewed even showed a 47-second clip demonstrating a tip for helping a toddler learn to use a zipper on their own.
Yeah.
Once the mechanism was perfected in 1917, it was virtually foolproof.
It really was.
But we still have that branding problem, because separable fastener is better than automatic continuous closure, but barely.
True. But the final piece of the puzzle, the name arrives in 1920.
Thank goodness.
The B.F. Goodrich Company decides to use Sunback's new fastener on a line of rubber boots. They want a catchy, modern name that conveys speed. They want something that sounds like the actual noise the slider makes when you pull it up quickly.
Zip.
Exactly. They call it the zipper.
It's brilliant onomatopoeia. It's snappy. It's memorable. So Elias Howe dreams it up in 1846. Gideon Sunback nails the mechanics in 1917. B.F. Goodrich gives it the iconic name in 1920. At this point, the story should be over. It should be on every piece of clothing in America by 1921.
But the crazy thing is, even with the perfect tech and the perfect name, it still took another 20 years before the zipper regularly appeared on everyday civilian clothing like pants and dresses.
How is that possible? I mean, if you have a superior technology, why wouldn't the garment industry adopt it immediately?
It really comes down to consumer psychology and trust. Let's look at the alternative buttons. If a button falls off your shirt while you're at work, it's embarrassing, sure, but it is a highly localized failure.
Yeah, you can pin it, or you can go home and sew a new one on in 2 minutes.
Exactly. But if a complex mechanical zipper breaks, jams, or separates while you're wearing it, the entire garment is catastrophically compromised.
That's a really good point. And you can't easily fix a zipper track with a needle and thread.
No, you can't. So if the general public wouldn't risk their modesty or their expensive wardrobes on an unproven mechanical device, who would test this? You'd need an environment where speed and utility mattered a whole lot more than fashion.
You need an environment where the stakes are life and death and logistics are everything. You need the military.
Exactly.
Which is a recurring theme in innovation. We see it with duct tape, we see it with certain types of synthetic rubber, and here we see it with the zipper.
The U.S. Army became the ultimate proving ground for Sunback's 1917 model. During World War I, the military needed a way to secure soldiers' money belts.
Okay, yeah.
Imagine being a soldier in the trenches of Europe. It's freezing, you are covered in mud, your hands are numb. Trying to unbutton a canvas belt with frozen, mud-caked fingers to get to your identification or your pay is nearly impossible.
But a zipper. You can grab a slider with a numb thumb and just pull.
Exactly. The Army tested the separable fastener, and it didn't jam in the mud. It didn't corrode and burst open under the physical strain of combat. Those 10 interlocking teeth per inch held firm.
Wow.
It proved that the zipper was not a novelty from a World's Fair. It was a practically indestructible piece of hardware.
That trench testing changed everything. It earned the trust that the civilian market was holding out on.
And that trust scaled massively from there. By 1930, the combined U.S. Armed Forces fully adopted the zipper for their standard World War II uniforms. We're talking millions of flight suits, gear bags, sleeping bags, and jackets, all utilizing this technology.
And when millions of service members return home from the war, they bring that trust back with them. They were used to the rugged convenience. Nobody wanted to go back to lacing up boots or individually buttoning 15 buttons on a jacket.
No way.
The military scale directly birthed the civilian scale. Today, manufacturers produce billions of zippers every single year. Billions. They are cast in metal, molded in plastics, baked into backpacks, suitcases, and tents. It is a monumental industrial triumph.
What fascinates me about that military adoption is that it proved how a series of fragile individual teeth could become an unbreakable barrier against the cold and the elements, once they interlocked. And looking at how the zipper works mechanically, it's hard not to see a parallel to human resilience.
Yeah.
The material we're exploring today actually takes this exact concept and applies it as a framework for our own well-being.
I found that part of the deep dive incredibly moving. We spent all this time talking about industrial engineering, and then the text presents us with this beautiful, simple metaphor.
Just a great shift.
Yeah. It suggests that individuals, especially within a family or a close community, are like separate pieces of fabric. On our own, we might be fine. But just as a zipper brings two pieces of fabric together to make them stronger and more useful, we achieve an entirely different level of strength when we interlock with the people we care about.
It moves from structural integrity to emotional integrity. And the sources don't just leave it as an abstract poetic idea either. They provide incredibly specific, actionable examples of what this togetherness looks like in practice.
Right.
They suggest sitting down and having conversations with a strict no electronics rule. They suggest playing board games, cooking or baking something to share, putting on a play in the living room, singing songs together. They even mention a specific song, families can be together forever, or simply telling stories.
When I read that list of activities, something clicked for me regarding the engineering we just talked about. If the individuals in a family are the two sides of the zipper track, what actually brings them together? Because the teeth don't just magically pull themselves together.
You need the slider.
Yes, you need the slider. The slider in this metaphor is the shared intentional activity.
Let's take that a step further. Think about what happens when families just exist in the same house without interacting.
Huh.
Sitting in the same room while everyone stares at their own smartphone isn't interlocking. That's just two pieces of fabric resting near each other. There's no bond.
Why, yeah.
You need a catalyst. You need an action like baking that cake or playing that game to act as the Y-shaped wedge that actively gathers the individual pieces and forces them into a unified interlocking whole.
And if we're being completely honest, family time or team building can sometimes feel like trying to yank a jammed zipper.
Yeah.
We have all experienced that friction.
Oh, absolutely.
You try to force a deep conversation with a grumpy teenager, or you mandate mandatory fun time, and the whole system binds up. It's incredibly frustrating. You're pulling and yanking, and nothing is connecting. But when you actively step away from that forced pressure and instead introduce a simple shared task, when you put away the phones and just chop vegetables together or shuffle a deck of cards, the connection suddenly becomes effortless. The slider moves smoothly.
The friction disappears because the activity provides a natural rhythm. The text prompts us to reflect on this by asking a very direct question. What are some things your family does to stay close to each other?
I love that.
It's essentially asking us to identify our own personal sliders, because the slider for one group of friends might be hiking, while the slider for a family might be cooking a specific Sunday dinner.
It completely changes how you look at a piece of clothing. Let's trace this incredible journey back. We started in 1846 with Elias Howe, a man whose automatic continuous clothing closure was a visionary idea totally eclipsed by his own sewing machine.
We saw the 40-year gap leading to the disastrous 1893 World's Fair debut of Whitcomb Judson's clunky jamming clasp blocker.
We witnessed the turning point in Hoboken, where Gideon Sunback obsessively chased the math until he perfected the 10 teeth per inch separable fastener in 1917, complete with that ingenious Y-shaped slider.
We watched it survive the brutal conditions of World War I, protecting soldiers' money belts in the mud, earning the trust required to conquer the civilian market and gain its iconic zipper name.
And finally, we saw how the physical mechanics of bringing two separate pieces of fabric into an unbreakable bond serves as the ultimate blueprint for intentional, shared human connection.
It's quite a journey.
So the next time you zip up your jacket on a chilly morning, take a second to realize what you're interacting with. You aren't just holding a mass-produced convenience, you are holding a tiny, daily reminder of how individual pieces become undeniably stronger when they are brought together.
And there is one final mechanical truth about the zipper that we touched on earlier, which I think provides a beautiful lingering thought for us. We talked about how the zipper only functions because the interlocking teeth on each side are slightly offset from one another.
Right, the clasping hands analogy.
Exactly that. If the teeth on the left side perfectly matched and aligned with the teeth on the right side, they wouldn't interlock at all. They would just crash into each other, and the zipper would fail. The connection physically requires them to be staggered. They have to make space for each other.
The mechanism relies on them not being identical.
It demands difference. And perhaps the true strength of a family or a friendship or a community relies on that exact same principle. It relies on us not being perfectly identical. It relies on our differences being perfectly offset, so that where one person has a gap, the other person provides strength.
So that invisible offset connection is exactly what keeps everything from falling apart. Next time you pull that slider, remember, it's our differences that allow us to lock together so tightly.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.